The air in the trauma bay at Forward Operating Base Archer was a familiar, toxic cocktail of antiseptic, iron, and dust. It was a place where life was measured in the frantic beeps of monitors and the steady, practiced movements of gloved hands. For Nurse Layla Hassan, it was just another Tuesday. She moved through the controlled chaos with a quiet efficiency that made her almost invisible. While other nurses and corpsmen shouted for supplies or barked vitals, Layla was a study in silence. Her hands were always steady, her gaze always focused, her presence a small island of calm in a sea of perpetual crisis. She was good at her job, impeccably so, but she was an outsider and everyone knew it. It wasn't just her reserved nature. It was her hijab, the simple, olive-drab scarf she wore tucked neatly into her scrubs. In a world of crew cuts and hardened, cynical faces, it was a symbol of a world most of the soldiers and staff didn't understand. They didn't mock her openly, not most of them, but the whispers followed her like a shadow. "What's she even doing here?" a young private had muttered in the chow hall. "Doesn't seem like her kind of place." Her kind of place. Layla had overheard it and felt the familiar, dull ache. They saw the scarf, and they stopped seeing the nurse. They saw a symbol, and they missed the soldier underneath. The one who saw it least of all was the man who ran the trauma bay like his personal kingdom. Major Frank Miller, the chief surgeon. Miller was a brilliant surgeon, a battlefield veteran with a swagger born of saving hundreds of lives. He was also arrogant, dismissive, and a firm believer in the rigid hierarchy of the military medical system. He saw Layla's quiet competence not as a strength, but as a lack of the aggressive, decisive fire he valued in his team. "Nurse Hassan," he'd said during a procedure last week, his voice dripping with condescending patience. "When I ask for a clamp, I mean I need it now, not after you've contemplated its philosophical significance. Pick up the pace." He treated her like a novice, a liability, someone to be managed rather than utilized. He assigned her to inventory, to prepping sterile kits, to anything that kept her away from the critical moments at the operating table. She was the Muslim nurse, the quiet one, the one he couldn't quite figure out and therefore couldn't trust. Layla absorbed the slights in silence. She had come to this dusty outpost in the middle of a forgotten war for her own reasons, reasons she kept locked away behind a wall of professional calm. She was here to save lives, to do her duty. The noise, the whispers, the major's arrogance. It was all just a distraction, another form of shrapnel she had to navigate. She had survived worse. Far worse. She finished her inventory count, her handwriting neat and precise in a logbook. The base was on high alert. A major offensive was underway in the nearby mountains, and the rhythmic thump-thump of distant helicopter rotors was a constant, ominous heartbeat. They were in the quiet before the storm. She could feel it in the air, a familiar, electric tension that made the hairs on her arms stand up. She ran a hand over a sterile surgical kit, her fingers tracing the outline of a decompression needle. Her mind, a library of trauma protocols, automatically ran through the steps. Second intercostal space, mid-clavicular line. A quick, decisive insertion. The hiss of escaping air. A life saved. It was a muscle memory from another life, a life before the quiet, before the scarf was a barrier instead of a part of her identity. She had been someone else then, someone who gave orders, who made the hard calls in the dirt and the blood, someone who had earned a different kind of respect. But that person was a ghost. Here, she was just Nurse Hassan, the woman in the hijab, waiting for the next wave of broken bodies to arrive. And as the radio on the far wall crackled to life with a frantic, static-laced shout, she knew the wait was over. The storm had just broken. The voice on the radio was a raw, panic scream. "Mayday! Mayday! Black Hawk down! I repeat, Black Hawk down just outside the wire. Multiple critical casualties, a whole damn chalk of Rangers." The trauma bay exploded into motion. The quiet hum of readiness was shattered by a cacophony of shouted orders, the clatter of steel carts, and the pounding of boots on linoleum. Major Miller was a whirlwind of command, his voice cutting through the rising panic like a scalpel. "Give me 6 units of Oneg on standby. I want trauma bays 1, 2, and 3 prepped and ready to receive. Move, people, move. Layla was already moving. She had heard the words Rangers and multiple critical, and her mind had shifted into a different gear. This wasn't a single IED victim or a sporadic gunshot wound. This was a mass casualty event, a mass goal, the ultimate test of any trauma unit. She began laying out tourniquets, chest tubes, and intubation kits with a speed and precision that was almost hypnotic. She organized the supplies not by protocol, but by the likely pattern of injuries from helicopter crash, blast trauma, crush injuries, severe burns. It was a level of predictive preparation that wasn't in any nursing manual. Miller, in his frantic orchestration of the room, noticed her for a split second. Hassan, I want you on intake. Triage the walking wounded and tag them. Keep the minor injuries out of my way. Do you understand? The critical cases come to me. It was another dismissal, another relegation to the sidelines. Intake was a job for a junior corpsman. He was placing her as far away from the life or death decisions as possible. Yes, Major, she said, her voice betraying no emotion. But as she walked toward the receiving entrance, she grabbed a full combat trauma pack, the kind reserved for medics in the field. She slung it over her shoulder. The Major didn't need to trust her. The wounded would. The first wave of casualties arrived on a torrent of rolling gurneys, a grim parade of broken bodies and pain-filled eyes. The doors to the bay were thrown open, letting in the chaotic sounds of the base, shouting, sirens, the ever-present roar of helicopter blades. Layla stood at the entrance, her face a mask of calm focus. A young ranger, his face a mess of blood and dirt, but his eyes clear, was limping, supported by 2 other soldiers. I'm fine, he was insisting. Get to the others. Layla intercepted him. Let me see, she said, her voice gentle but firm. She quickly assessed his injuries, a dislocated shoulder, a deep laceration on his leg. She tagged him green. You can wait, she said, not unkindly. Go to Bay 4. Someone will be with you. Her movements were quick, her assessments brutally efficient. She wasn't just tagging. She was diagnosing, prioritizing, her mind a supercomputer of trauma care. She saw a soldier with a seemingly minor chest wound and immediately tagged him red, recognizing the subtle signs of a developing pneumothorax that the overwhelmed corpsman had missed. She saw another with horrific-looking burns and tagged him yellow, knowing the airway was clear and he was stable for now. She was a master of the grim art of battlefield triage, deciding in a split second who had a chance and who had to wait. Miller, working feverishly on a soldier with a massive abdominal wound, caught a glimpse of her. He saw the red tag on the soldier with the small chest wound and was about to shout at her for miscategorizing when another medic yelled, "He's crashing. Can't breathe." Layla was already there, a decompression needle in her hand. "Get out of the way," she ordered the medic, and with a precision that stunned everyone who saw it, she plunged the needle into the soldier's chest. The hiss of air was audible even over the din. The soldier gasped, his vitals on the nearby monitor immediately beginning to climb. Miller froze, his scalpel hovering. He had just witnessed a field procedure performed with a level of skill and confidence he had only ever seen in the most elite Special Forces medics. And she had done it without asking, without hesitation. He didn't have time to process it. The next gurney was wheeled in, and the man on it made his blood run cold. It was the Ranger commander, a master sergeant, his body a ruin of shrapnel and blast injuries. He was unconscious, his breathing shallow, his pulse a faint, thready whisper. This was the one, the linchpin. If they lost him, they lost the heart of the unit. Get him to Bay 1, Miller roared, abandoning his current patient to a junior surgeon. This one is mine. As they rushed the commander into the primary trauma bay, Layla followed, the combat pack still on her shoulder. She knew, with a certainty that chilled her to the bone, that this was where the Real fight would be. And she knew she couldn't stay on the sidelines any longer. The scene in Trauma Bay 1 was a desperate, losing battle. The Ranger Master Sergeant was fading, his life bleeding out onto the cold steel of the gurney. Monitors shrieked, a chorus of imminent failure. Major Miller was a man possessed, his hands a blur of motion as he fought to find and clamp the source of the massive internal bleeding. More blood. Damn it. I need more blood, he shouted, his voice raw with frustration. His pressure is bottoming out. We're losing him. Layla stood at the foot of the gurney, her eyes scanning not the main wound that had captured all of Miller's attention, but the patient as a whole. She saw the distended veins in his neck, the slight but significant tracheal deviation, the asymmetrical movement of his chest. Miller, focused on the catastrophic hemorrhaging in the abdomen, was missing the real killer. It wasn't the bleeding that was going to stop his heart. It was the air crushing it. Major, she said, her voice cutting through the noise with an unnerving calm. Stop. You're missing the primary injury. Miller didn't even look up. Get out of my bay, nurse. I'm trying to save this man's life. You're going to kill him, she retorted, her voice hardening. It's a tension hemothorax. His entire chest cavity is filling with blood and air. You can't fix the bleed until you release the pressure. He's got less than a minute. Miller finally looked up, his face a mask of pure fury. I have had enough of your insubordination. I gave you an order. Get out. Now. He pointed a bloody, gloved finger towards the door. Two corpsmen moved hesitantly towards Layla, unsure what to do. The major had given a direct order, but the certainty in the nurse's voice was absolute. They had all seen what she had done with the decompression needle just minutes before. The monitor for the master sergeant let out a long, continuous tone. Flatline. He's in V-fib. Starting compressions, a medic yelled. Miller's face went white. It was over. He had failed. But Layla moved. She was a blur of motion, shoving past the corpsman, ignoring the major's enraged shout. She ripped a chest tube kit from her trauma pack. Paddles. Charge to 200, she commanded, her voice ringing with an authority that no one in the room dared to question. They obeyed instinctively. As the paddles were charged, she didn't wait for Miller. She made a swift, deep incision between the commander's ribs, a place she found by touch, by feel, by a knowledge that was not learned in a nursing school. She shoved her finger into the wound, creating a channel, and then forced the chest tube in with a single, powerful motion. A torrent of dark blood and air erupted from the tube. The effect was instantaneous. On the monitor, the flat line wavered, then jumped a single blessed spike. Clear, the medic with the paddle shouted. The commander's body convulsed. Another spike. A rhythm. Weak but there. His blood pressure began to register, a fragile, hopeful number on the screen. The entire room was silent, paralyzed by what they had just witnessed. Layla hadn't just saved him. She had resurrected him. She had defied a direct order from the chief surgeon, performed a procedure far outside the scope of a nurse, and brought a man back from the dead, all in the space of 30 seconds. Miller stood frozen, the bloody clamp still in his hand. He stared at her, at the quiet, unassuming nurse he had ridiculed and dismissed. He was looking at her, but he was seeing something else, something impossible. He saw a warrior. Layla didn't look at him. She was already working on the commander, her hands moving to secure the chest tube, to start a new four-line, her focus absolute. She had not done it for glory. She had not done it to prove him wrong. She had done it because it was her duty, a duty that went far deeper than the rank on his collar or the title on her badge. The silence in the bay was finally broken by the master sergeant, his eyes fluttering open for a second, his voice a raw, ragged whisper. He looked past Miller, his gaze finding Layla. It's you, he breathed, a flicker of disbelief and profound recognition in his eyes. The ghost. Then his eyes rolled back, and he was lost to the haze of morphine. But the name hung in the air, a phantom word that meant nothing and everything. Miller's blood ran cold. The ghost. A legend. A myth whispered in the classified briefings of the special operations world. A solo combat medic who had operated deep behind enemy lines during the early days of the war. A ghost who had saved a dozen operators in an ambush, who had performed impossible surgeries in the dirt and the dark, and who had then vanished from the records, presumed dead. He stared at Layla, at the hijab tucked neatly into her scrubs, and the impossible truth crashed down on him with the force of a physical blow. The mockery, the whispers, the underestimation, it had all been a farce. He hadn't been sidelining a nurse. He had been benching a legend. The chaos in the trauma bay had subsided, replaced by a low, humming efficiency. The wounded rangers, one by one, were stabilized. The frantic symphony of alarms had softened to the steady, rhythmic beeping of monitors. Life, fragile but persistent, was winning. But the atmosphere was charged with a new, unspoken tension. Every medic, every nurse, every corpsman in that room now moved around Layla Hassan with a wide berth of awe and confusion. They had witnessed a miracle, and she was its source. Major Miller had not spoken a word since the master sergeant had called her the ghost. He had finished the surgery, his hands moving with their usual skill, but his mind was 1,000 miles away. He was a man adrift, his entire worldview, his understanding of rank and expertise shattered. He watched Layla as she moved from bed to bed, checking vitals, adjusting drips, her presence a quiet, reassuring constant. She wasn't gloating. She wasn't even looking at him. She was just doing her job, the job she had been doing all along. Only now, everyone was seeing it for what it truly was. When the last of the wounded had been moved to the surgical ICU, Layla began to clean her station, wiping down the stainless steel with a practiced, methodical motion. The other nurses offered to help, their voices tentative, respectful. "We've got it, Layla. You should rest." She simply gave a small nod and continued her work. She didn't want their help or their sudden reverence. She wanted the return of her anonymity, a piece she now knew was gone forever. Miller finally approached her. He stood there for a long moment, the silence stretching between them. The usual swagger was gone from his posture. He looked older, wearier. "I've been a surgeon for 25 years, he began, his voice low, almost a whisper. "I've served in 4 combat zones. I thought I'd seen everything." He looked at her, his eyes searching for an answer. "I was wrong." Layla stopped wiping the counter. She didn't look at him, but she listened. "Who are you?" he asked, the question stripped of all its earlier arrogance. It was a genuine plea for understanding. Layla put down the cloth and finally turned to face him. "I'm a nurse, Major," she said, her voice soft but unyielding. "That's all you need to know." "No," he said, shaking his head. "The ghost of Kandahar. That's what he called you. I've heard the stories. A single medic, a woman, attached to a Tier 1 unit, saved an entire ODA after they were ambushed, vanished after the mission. The file was sealed. They said she was killed in the exfil." His eyes locked onto hers. They were wrong, weren't they? A flicker of old pain crossed Layla's face, a ghost of a memory she had fought for years to bury. "That was another life," she whispered. "I left it behind." "Why?" he pressed. "Someone with your skills. Why hide in a place like this, letting people like me treat you like a trainee?" For the first time, her composure cracked. A single tear traced a path down her cheek. "Because in that life," she said, her voice thick with an emotion she rarely allowed herself to feel, "I saved 12 men, and I lost one. I came here because I wanted to save lives without having to count the dead anymore. I just wanted it to be quiet." The raw honesty of her confession silenced him. He finally understood. Her quietness wasn't a weakness, it was a penance. Her silence was a shield against the noise of a past he couldn't even imagine. He stood there, humbled, the full weight of his own ignorance crashing down on him. The woman he had mocked, the nurse he had dismissed, was a hero hiding from her own legend. The door to the bay opened, and a colonel from the Special Operations Command strode in. He ignored Miller and walked directly to Layla. "Ma'am," he said, his voice filled with a profound, immediate respect. "Master Sergeant Davis is awake. He's asking for you." Layla wiped the tear from her cheek, her professional mask slipping back into place. She nodded and walked past both men, heading for the ICU. As she left, the colonel turned to Miller. "You have no idea what you have here, Major," he said, his tone a quiet warning. "That woman is a living legend. The fact that she's wearing your scrubs is an honor you haven't earned." Miller just watched her go, her quiet figure disappearing down the long, sterile hallway. The whispers, the mockery, the doubt, it all seemed like a distant, shameful dream. He hadn't just been wrong about a nurse. He had been blind to the presence of greatness. The quiet Muslim nurse had saved them all, and in doing so had forced him to see the truth not just about her, but about himself. The days that followed were a quiet revolution at FOB Archer. The story of what happened in the trauma base spread through the base not like a wildfire, but like a rising tide, subtle and unstoppable. Soldiers in the Chow Hall would fall silent when Layla walked in. The young corpsmen who had once ignored her now sought her out, asking quiet questions about technique, their faces a mixture of admiration and awe. She was no longer just a nurse. She was a presence. Layla, for her part, tried to return to her routine. She took her shifts, did her inventory, and tended to her patients with the same quiet dedication as before. She deflected all questions about her past with a gentle but firm wall of silence. She had not asked for this attention, and she did not want it. But the ghost was out of the bottle. Major Miller was the most changed of all. He was a man humbled to his core. He no longer barked orders at Layla. He consulted her. During complex procedures, he would pause and ask, "Hassan, what do you see?" He was learning from her, absorbing her preternatural ability to read a patient, to see the subtle signs of a crisis before it happened. He was a great surgeon, but he was finally admitting that there were kinds of knowledge that couldn't be learned in medical school. The Ranger Master Sergeant, Davis, recovered with a speed that amazed the doctors. He insisted it was because Layla was overseeing his care. They would sit for hours in his room, not talking about the war, but about home, about the lives they hoped to return to. He saw the soldier in her, and she saw the man in him. It was a quiet, profound friendship forged in the crucible of shared trauma. One afternoon, a high-ranking delegation arrived on the base. It was unannounced, a surprise visit from the CENTCOM Surgeon General himself, a formidable three-star general named Peterson. He wasn't there to inspect the base. He was there to see Layla. He found her in the physical therapy ward, helping a young soldier learn to walk again on a prosthetic leg. "Nurse Hassan," he said, his voice gentle. Layla stood and turned, her expression calm. General Peterson looked at her, his eyes holding a deep, knowing respect. "I've read the after-action report from the Black Hawk incident," he said. "And I've read another, much older report, one that was sealed a long time ago." He paused. It takes a special kind of courage to walk away from a legend. It takes an even greater courage to become one all over again, whether you want to or not. He handed her a small, velvet box. "The Secretary of Defense has personally authorized this. It's not a military award. It's a civilian one, the highest we can give." Layla opened it. Inside was the Secretary of Defense Medal for Distinguished Public Service. Engraved on the back were the words, "For courage that transcends any uniform." "We can't officially acknowledge who you were," the general said softly, "but we can honor who you are. The world needs people like you, Layla. Not just in the shadows, but in the light." Layla looked down at the medal, a single tear falling onto the polished silver. It wasn't an award for being a ghost. It was an award for being a nurse, for being herself. A few weeks later, Major Miller was offered a prestigious promotion, a chief of surgery position at a major military hospital back in the States. He turned it down. "I think I've still got a few things to learn right here," he told his commanding officer. The mockery had vanished from FOB Archer. The whispers were gone. When the soldiers saw Layla Hassan walking across the dusty compound, her hijab a quiet flag of her faith and her identity, they didn't see an outsider. They saw a guardian. They saw the woman who had faced down death in a chaotic trauma bay and refused to blink. They saw the quiet nurse who had saved every single one of them, not just with her hands, but with a spirit that was more resilient than any armor. Her war was different now, but she was still on the front lines, a silent, steady presence in a world of noise and pain. And she was exactly where she needed to be.